There's something almost magical about the way ancient societies moved through time, not by clocks or calendars, but by rituals so deeply woven into daily life that they became the heartbeat of entire civilizations. Picture this, a village gathering at dawn, their voices rising in unison as they chant prayers to the gods of the harvest, or a pharaoh standing beneath the stars, performing ceremonies so precise they could predict the flooding of the Nile. These weren't just traditions, they were the invisible threads that held societies together, turning chaos into order, strangers into communities, and the unknown into something sacred. Today, we're stepping into that world, a world where every action, from the smallest daily task to the grandest festival, was part of a larger tapestry of meaning. Think about the last time you felt truly connected to something bigger than yourself, maybe a holiday celebration, a family tradition, or even a shared moment of silence. Now multiply that feeling by centuries, and you'll start to understand the power of these ancient rituals. They weren't just routines, they were lifelines. The Maya tracked time with celestial precision, their priests interpreting the movements of the stars as divine messages. In Egypt, the weighing of the heart ceremony wasn't just a funeral rite, it was a cosmic judgment determining eternity. And in the misty highlands of the Andes, the Inca offered sacrifices to the sun, believing their survival depended on its favor. These rituals were more than spectacle. They were the glue of civilization, binding people to their gods, their leaders, and each other. So why does this matter to us today? Because hidden in these ancient practices are echoes of our own lives. The way we mark time, honor milestones, and seek meaning in the chaos. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover 38 of these extraordinary rituals, each a window into how our ancestors turned the ordinary into the sacred. From the solemn to the surreal, these traditions reveal a universal truth. Humans have always craved connection, order, and a sense of purpose. And as we explore them together, you might just find yourself wondering what rituals of ours will future civilizations look back on in awe. Let's begin this journey into the past, where every chant, every offering, and every ceremony tells a story about who we were and who we still are. In the heart of ancient Rome, where marble temples gleamed under the Mediterranean sun, a flame burned with the weight of an entire empire on its shoulders. The sacred fire of Vesta wasn't just a flickering light. It was the pulse of Rome itself, guarded day and night by the Vestal virgins, women whose purity was believed to hold the city's fate in their hands. Imagine the pressure, a single moment of neglect, a stray gust of wind, and the flame could vanish, signaling doom for the Republic. These priestesses, selected as young girls from noble families, dedicated 3 decades of their lives to this sacred duty. Their rituals were meticulous, feeding the fire with only the purest wood, chanting prayers at dawn and dusk, and ensuring no shadow of impurity crossed the temple's threshold. But why fire? To the Romans, it represented more than warmth or light. It was the essence of civilization. Just as a household hearth united a family, Vesta's flame united Rome. The Vestals weren't merely caretakers, they were living bridges between the mortal world and the gods. Their chastity wasn't just a rule, it was a cosmic contract. If a Vestal broke her vows, the punishment was burial alive, a chilling reminder that Rome's survival depended on divine favor. And here's the twist, their influence stretched far beyond religion. When generals marched off to war or senators debated laws, they first sought the Vestal's blessings. The fire's endurance was Rome's endurance, a belief so deep that even emperors bowed to its symbolism. What's truly fascinating is how this ritual mirrors our own modern obsessions with continuity and security. Today, we worry over stock markets or power grids, but the ancient Romans watched a flame. The Vestal's devotion reveals a universal truth. Humans will always search for something eternal to anchor their hopes, whether it's a sacred fire, a nation's flag, or the unbroken thread of tradition. And in that search, we find the fragile, beautiful balance between order and chaos, between the divine and the everyday. While Rome guarded its sacred flame, another ritual unfolded in the shadows of ancient Greece, one so shrouded in secrecy that its full truth died with its last initiates. The Eleusinian Mysteries weren't just ceremonies, they were a collective leap of faith, drawing thousands over centuries to a small temple near Athens. Imagine walking the sacred way under torchlight, your footsteps echoing with those of philosophers, emperors, and slaves, all equal in their hunger for transcendence. At the heart of it all lay Demeter's grief, the story of her daughter Persephone, torn between the underworld and the living, mirroring humanity's own dance between mortality and the divine. What made these rites so powerful wasn't just the promise of an afterlife, it was the visceral experience. Initiates drank kykeon, a barley potion some believe induced visions, blurring the line between ritual and revelation. They watched as priests reenacted Persephone's return from Hades, her reunion with Demeter symbolizing cycles of decay and renewal. But here's the twist, no one ever spoke of what happened inside the Telesterion, the hall where the deepest secrets unfolded. The penalty for breaking this silence, death. Even now, historians piece together fragments, a whispered phrase from Cicero, a cryptic line in a poem, but the core remains elusive. This wasn't mere theater, it was psychological alchemy. By binding participants to silence, the mysteries created an invisible web of trust. A farmer from Corinth and a scholar from Alexandria might never meet again, but they shared something beyond words. That exclusivity forged bonds stronger than laws or treaties, uniting diverse people under a single spiritual language. And the ritual's longevity, lasting longer than Christianity, has existed hints at something timeless. The human need to touch the unknown, to stand at the edge of darkness and feel, just for a moment, that death isn't an end but a door. Think of how we today chase similar revelations through meditation retreats, psychedelic therapy, or even immersive art. The methods change, but the yearning remains. The Eleusinian Mysteries remind us that some truths resist explanation. They must be lived, felt in the bones, and perhaps that's why their silence still speaks to us across millennia, not as a void, but as an invitation to keep seeking. The moment a pharaoh took his last breath, an extraordinary clock began ticking, not one of hours and minutes, but of sacred spells and meticulously measured days. In the hushed chambers of the embalming house, priests worked against time itself, transforming a mortal body into an eternal vessel through rituals so precise they blurred the line between science and magic. The mummification process was just the beginning. What truly mattered was awakening the pharaoh's Ka, his life force, through a ceremony called the opening of the mouth. Picture this, a priest raising an adze, a ritual tool shaped like a celestial serpent, to touch the lips of the death mask. With each movement, he recited incantations from the Book of the Dead, coaxing the pharaoh's senses back to existence. The eyes to see the gods, the ears to hear their wisdom, the mouth to speak divine commands. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was the ultimate act of royal power, ensuring the pharaoh could rule forever in the afterlife as he had on earth. But here's what's often overlooked. These rites weren't just about one man's immortality. They were the glue holding Egypt's entire worldview together. The priests didn't merely preserve a body, They maintained the cosmic balance between order and chaos. Every linen strip wrapped, every amulet placed over the heart, echoed the rhythm of the Nile's floods and the certainty of the sunrise. When commoners saw the pharaoh's funerary procession winding toward the pyramids, they weren't witnessing a funeral, they were watching the universe's gears turn smoothly, proof that their civilization stood on sacred ground. Even the tools used had divine origins. Legend claimed the adze was forged from the iron of meteors, metal that had fallen from the heavens themselves. The genius of these rituals lay in their duality. While the pharaoh's card journeyed through the underworld, his earthly authority remained unshaken. The same ceremonies that opened the mouth of a mummy also renewed the mandate of his successor, linking generations in an unbroken chain of divine kingship. And perhaps that's why these practices endured for millennia. They answered humanity's deepest fears of death, of disorder, of being forgotten. Today, we scroll through digital memorials or leave flowers at graves, but the ancient Egyptians built monuments and spells meant to last literal eternities. Their rituals whisper a bold claim across the centuries that with the right words, the right actions, even time itself could be defied. Deep in the valley of Mexico, as the Pleiades constellation reached its zenith, an entire civilization held its breath. The Aztec New Fire Ceremony wasn't just a ritual, it was a cosmic gamble, a moment when time itself seemed to pause. Every 52 years, as their sacred calendar completed a full cycle, priests would snuff out every flame in the empire, from the grandest temple braziers to the humblest hearths in peasant homes. Imagine the darkness, a world without fire, without warmth, without the familiar glow of cooking pits or ceremonial pyres. For 5 tense days, the Aztec people fasted, shattered their pottery, and waited. All eyes turned to the sacred hill of Huaxtitlan, where priests scanned the night sky for one critical sign, the Pleiades crossing the meridian. If the stars remained steady, it meant the universe had granted another 52 years of life. But if the constellation faltered, the gods had abandoned them, and the dreaded Tzimime star demons would descend to devour humanity. The moment the stars aligned, the ceremony erupted into a spectacle of rebirth. A chosen prisoner, often a captured warrior of high status, was led to the temple summit. His heart, torn from his chest in a single practiced motion, became the spark for the new era. As blood soaked the altar, priests kindled a flame on his open breast, using friction sticks to transfer the sacred fire to torches. Runners then carried these flames to every corner of the empire, from Tenochtitlan's towering pyramids to the farthest fishing villages along Lake Texcoco. Within hours, the darkness lifted not just literally but spiritually. The world had been renewed. What's astonishing isn't just the drama of the ritual, but how it bound together every layer of Aztec society. This wasn't merely religion, it was a masterclass in political control. By centralizing the power to create fire, the state reminded its people of their dependence on the ruling class. The ceremony also synchronized time across vast territories, resetting agricultural cycles and tax collections with celestial precision. Even the choice of sacrificial victims carried meaning, often warriors from rival city-states, their deaths symbolizing the empire's dominance. And the shared ordeal of those fireless days, a collective trauma that forged unity, making every citizen, from farmer to emperor, feel the weight of the cosmos together. Today, we mark time with atomic clocks and digital calendars, but the Aztecs understood something profound. Time isn't just measured, it's felt. Their new fire ceremony speaks to a universal human need to punctuate existence with moments of collective renewal. We see echoes of it in our New Year's countdowns, in the ball drops and fireworks that promise fresh starts. But the Aztecs took it further, staking their survival on the perfect alignment of stars and sacrifice. Their ritual was a bold declaration that civilization isn't inevitable, it's a fragile flame, one that must sometimes be extinguished to burn brighter. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the air itself seemed to hum with divine energy, one woman's trance could alter the fate of nations. The Oracle of Delphi wasn't just a seer, she was the living mouthpiece of Apollo, a conduit between gods and mortals whose prophecies launched fleets, toppled kings, and redirected the course of Greek history. Picture the scene, a petitioner ascending the sacred way, passing treasure-laden monuments left by grateful rulers, his heart pounding as he approached the dimly lit Aditon beneath the temple. There, perched on a tripod above a fissure in the earth, the Pythia inhaled vapors that scholars now believe were ethylene gas rising from the bedrock. Her eyes rolled back, her body convulsed, and then the god spoke through her, in riddles so cryptic they required teams of priests to interpret. What's remarkable isn't just the ritual's theatrics, but how it transformed uncertainty into action. When Croesus of Lydia asked whether to attack Persia, the oracle replied that if he did, a great empire would fall. He assumed it meant Persia's, but it was his own. Athens, facing Persian invasion, was told to trust their wooden walls. Some argued for literal fortifications, but Themistocles correctly interpreted this as their navy, leading to victory at Salamis. The genius of Delphi lay in this very ambiguity. The prophecies weren't roadmaps but mirrors, reflecting back the petitioner's own ambitions and fears. And because the priests kept meticulous archives of past predictions, they could adjust interpretations to maintain Delphi's reputation across centuries. The oracle's true power came from her neutrality. Unlike kings or generals, she had no army, no territory, just the unshakable belief that Apollo's wisdom transcended petty human conflicts. City-states at war would both consult her, each hoping for divine endorsement. Her influence stretched from the founding of colonies to the drafting of laws, making Delphi a less a religious site than the ancient world's most powerful think tank. Even the temple's location was strategic, built over the intersection of two fault lines, its intoxicating vapors and seismic tremors reinforcing the idea that this was where earth and heaven truly met. Today, we might compare Delphi to algorithms or expert panel systems we trust to distill chaos into actionable insights. But the Pythia reminds us that even in our data-driven age, humans crave rituals that acknowledge the unknown. Her prophecies weren't about predicting the future, but about giving leaders the courage to create it. And in those moments when her voice cracked with divine frenzy, she offered something no council or spreadsheet ever could: the electrifying sense that just maybe the universe was listening. In the shadow of Babylon's towering ziggurats, as the spring equinox painted the Euphrates gold, an entire civilization held its breath for 12 days that would decide its fate. The Akitu festival wasn't just Mesopotamia's New Year. It was a high-stakes drama where gods judged kings, and the very order of the universe hung in the balance. Imagine the scene. The statues of Marduk and other deities carried through the Ishtar Gate on golden barges, their jeweled eyes glinting as crowds prostrated themselves in the dust. But the real spectacle happened behind closed doors, where the king of Babylon faced a trial no modern leader could fathom. Stripped of his crown and scepter, he knelt before the high priest, who struck his face once, twice, until tears streamed down his cheeks. This ritual humiliation wasn't cruelty, it was the ultimate test of legitimacy. If the king wept convincingly, proving his humility before the gods, Marduk would restore his regalia, renewing his divine right to rule for another year. The genius of Akitu lay in its layered symbolism. By physically reenacting Marduk's mythical battle against chaos, the Enuma Elish epic, the Babylonians didn't just tell a story, they became part of it. The king's temporary downfall mirrored the god's struggle, and his restoration signaled the world's rebirth. Even the festival's timing was cosmic, aligning with the flooding of the Euphrates, which brought life-giving silt to the fields. But this wasn't just spiritual theater, it was a masterclass in political stability. The ceremony allowed Babylon to vent societal tensions. Commoners watched elites bow, priests asserted their authority, and subject nations saw the king's divine endorsement firsthand. For those 12 days, every theft settled in court, every debt record was nullified, and slaves walked free, a controlled chaos that made the return to order feel like divine mercy. What's often overlooked is how Akitu shaped Mesopotamia's worldview. The festival's climax came when priests recited the creation epic, binding everyone from potters to princes to a shared origin story. The rituals also served as an ancient census. Provincial governors had to attend, bringing tribute and reaffirming loyalty under the god's gaze. And here's the twist: when foreign powers like the Persians conquered Babylon, they didn't abolish Akitu, they participated, donning the humbled king's robe themselves. The ritual was so potent that even conquerors needed its legitimacy. Today, we mark New Year's with fireworks and resolutions, but the Babylonians understood something profound. Renewal requires more than changing a calendar. It demands accountability, a moment where power bows to something greater. Akitu's echoes linger in our own traditions, the ball dropping in Times Square, the president's oath on a Bible, but its raw theatricality reminds us of a time when the line between ruler and ritual wasn't just crossed, it was dissolved. In that sacred space between humiliation and restoration, between chaos and order, an empire found its heartbeat. At the dizzying heights of the Andes, where thin air turns breath into mist and the sun burns with unrelenting intensity, the Inca performed one of history's most haunting acts of devotion, the Kapacoccha ceremony. Picture a child, perhaps no older than 8, dressed in fine woven garments, their cheeks flushed from the cold as priests led them up slopes no outsider could climb without collapsing. These chosen ones, selected for their physical perfection and unblemished lineage, weren't taken unwillingly. They were revered as messengers to the gods, their sacrifice a sacred contract between humanity and the forces that sustained life itself. The logic behind these rituals was rooted in the Inca concept of Aini reciprocity. Just as the sun gave warmth and the earth yielded crops, humans had to give something of equal value in return. During droughts, earthquakes, or the death of an emperor, the Kapacoccha served as the ultimate offering. But this wasn't an act of desperation. It was a carefully orchestrated dialogue with the divine. Months before the ceremony, the children were honored like royalty, fed lavish meals, and adorned with gold and spondylus shells. Their final journey to mountain summits was a procession of chanting and music, a celebration masking the grim inevitability ahead. Archaeologists have found these mummies frozen in time, their bodies curled as if in sleep, their faces eerily peaceful testaments to a belief system where death wasn't an end, but a transformation into divine intermediaries. What's often misunderstood is the profound spiritual calculus behind these sacrifices. To the Inca, the mountains weren't just landforms, they were Apu's living deities who controlled weather and fertility. By placing their most precious resource, unblemished children, at these sacred peaks, they weren't pleading for mercy but reinforcing a cosmic balance. The children's frozen remains, preserved by altitude and cold, became eternal guardians, their spirits woven into the fabric of the landscape. Modern discoveries like the Luleloko mummies, found with their hair still braided and ceremonial vessels beside them, reveal how meticulously these rituals honored the departed. The Kapacoccha forces us to confront a difficult truth. For the Inca, survival wasn't guaranteed by technology or brute force. but by maintaining an unbroken covenant with nature. Today, we might recoil at such practices, but our ancestors understood something we've forgotten: that harmony with the world comes at a cost. We see echoes of this in climate pledges or conservation efforts, though our sacrifices are policy papers rather than living beings. The Inca's frozen messengers whisper across centuries, reminding us that civilizations rise and fall not just on what they take from the earth, but on what they're willing to give back. While the Inca offered children to mountain gods and Babylonians humbled their kings, Japan perfected a ritual of divine communion so intimate it blurred the line between monarch and deity. The Degasi wasn't just an emperor's coronation, it was a rebirth, a moment when a mortal man stepped into the sacred lineage of the sun itself. Picture this: deep within the palace grounds, under a canopy of ancient cypress wood, a thatched hut stood empty except for 2 beds of pure silk. One for the new emperor, one for Amaterasu, the sun goddess who, according to Shinto belief, had sent her grandson to rule Japan 2,600 years earlier. As the autumn moon hung low, the emperor entered alone, wearing robes woven with the patterns of the celestial plane. There, in the flickering light of sacred fires, he shared a meal not just with a myth but with his divine ancestor. The heart of the ritual lay in the rice, not ordinary grain, but the first harvest from specially consecrated fields. Farmers tended these paddies in silence, their every movement prescribed by tradition, as if the plants themselves were listening. When the emperor consumed this rice, he wasn't just eating, he was absorbing the essence of Amaterasu's power, transforming his mortal body into a vessel of her divine will. The ceremony's climax came as he lay on the sacred bed, believed to briefly merge with the goddess in a symbolic union that echoed the primal marriage of heaven and earth. To witness this was to see the unbroken chain of Japan's history made flesh, a living bridge between the age of gods and the modern world. What set the Degasi apart was its delicate balance of secrecy and spectacle. While the inner rites remained shrouded, no photographs, no outsiders, the public saw processions of priests bearing offerings, silkworms for prosperity, seaweed for the bounty of the sea, and sake brewed from the same sacred rice. This wasn't just theater, it was a masterclass in political theology. By rooting imperial authority in agricultural cycles rather than brute conquest, the ritual tied the emperor's legitimacy to the land itself. When peasants ate their own harvest, they unknowingly mirrored their sovereign's sacred act, binding every citizen to the cosmic order. The genius of the Degasi lay in its adaptability. Over centuries, as Japan swung between feudalism and modernity, the ritual endured not as a relic but as a living pulse. Even when emperors renounced divine status after World War II, the ceremony continued, its meaning subtly shifting to emphasize cultural continuity rather than outright divinity. Today, as scientists analyze the ritual's DNA sequences to trace Japan's migration patterns, and scholars debate whether the bed sharing symbolized shamanic trances or astral alignment, one truth remains: some rituals don't just reflect power, they generate it, season after season, reign after reign, in an unbroken rhythm as timeless as the rising sun. As the first light of May dawned over the rolling green hills of ancient Ireland, smoke curled into the sky from hundreds of hilltop bonfires, a signal that winter's grip had finally broken. The Celts didn't just light these Beltane fires for warmth, they were acts of alchemy, transforming the mundane into the sacred through crackling flames. Picture farmers driving their cattle between twin bonfires, the animals' hides dusted with ashes believed to ward off disease. Young couples, hands clasped, daring each other to leap over the tallest flames, not as reckless daredevils, but as participants in a ritual as old as the land itself. Their laughter mixed with the scent of burning hawthorn, while elders watched the smoke's direction, divining the year's fortune. This wasn't mere celebration, it was a cosmic handshake between humanity and the earth. What made Beltane extraordinary was its dual nature, both a spiritual rite and a practical agricultural pivot. The bonfire's timing coincided with the moving of livestock to summer pastures, a critical moment when a single blight could doom entire communities. By bathing the herds in smoke, the Celts blended proto-science with symbolism, harnessing antiseptic properties of certain woods while invoking the protection of the god Belenus. Even the act of jumping flames served multiple purposes, testing a suitor's agility and thus his genetic fitness, purifying the body before the planting season, and, as folklore whispered, increasing a woman's chances of conception. The ashes, carefully collected afterward, were scattered over fields like dark snow, completing the cycle of renewal. Beltane's genius lay in how it wove together individual hopes and communal survival. A dance around the maypole wasn't just whimsy. Its interwoven ribbons mirrored the interdependence of village life, the temporary lifting of social norms where young men and women could slip into the woods together. Wasn't license for chaos, but a pressure valve ensuring marriages rooted in mutual attraction, which strengthened social bonds. And when dawn broke after the all-night feasting, every household carried home an ember from the sacred fire to relight their hearths, tying each family's fortune to the collective. Today, we see echoes of Beltane in spring festivals and May Day parades, though the stakes feel lighter. But for the Celts, these rituals were lifelines, a way to sync their lives with the land's unyielding rhythms. Their bonfires were more than light against the dark. They were declarations of trust that the earth would keep its promises, that the sun's return wasn't guaranteed, but earned through respect, reciprocity, and the occasional leap of faith. On the wind-scoured heights of ancient Persia, where the desert met the sky, the dead found their final rest not in the earth, but in the open air, a practice as striking as it was sacred. The Zoroastrians built their towers of silence not as monuments, but as instruments of purity, circular stone platforms where bodies were laid bare to the elements. Imagine the scene, a funeral procession winding up the hillside, the deceased wrapped in simple white muslin, their arrival at the tower marked not by weeping, but by solemn chants to Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom. Then the most sacred act of all, the exposure of the body to the sky, where vultures, those swift and efficient cleansers, would descend like winged priests to perform their duty. This wasn't mere practicality, it was theology carved into ritual. Zoroastrians saw the earth as a living entity, too sacred to be polluted by decay, and fire as a divine force too pure to burn the dead. By offering their loved ones to the birds, they transformed death into an act of ecological devotion, a final gift to the natural order. The towers themselves were masterpieces of symbolic design. Their concentric circles separated men, women, and children, reflecting the community's structure even in death, while the central pit collected bones bleached clean by sun and scavengers. Over time, these remains would dissolve into dust, mingling with lime to avoid contaminating water or soil, a cycle of return as meticulous as it was reverent. What's often overlooked is how this ritual shaped Zoroastrian life, not just death. Their obsession with purity extended to daily routines, washing before prayers, avoiding breath pollution by covering the mouth, even the careful disposal of cut hair and nails. The Towers of Silence were merely the most visible expression of a world where every action, from cooking to childbirth, was measured against its potential to corrupt or cleanse. And here's the twist: while outsiders sometimes misinterpreted these practices as harsh, for Zoroastrians, they were acts of profound love. By sparing the earth their decay, they honored creation itself, ensuring their departure left no stain on the world they cherished. Today, as modern parsers grapple with vanishing vulture populations and urbanization's encroachment, the ritual evolves solar concentrators now aid decomposition where birds no longer flock. Yet the core remains unchanged, a reminder that how we treat our dead speaks volumes about how we value the living. In a world of concrete cemeteries and embalming fluids, the towers of silence whisper an alternative, one where death isn't hidden but integrated, not an end but a last selfless act of balance. The bull pawed the earth, its nostrils flaring as the crowd's chant rose to a fever pitch. In the heart of Bronze Age Crete, this wasn't just a spectacle, it was a sacred dance with death itself. Minone bull leaping defies easy categorization, part athletic feat, part religious theater, part coming-of-age trial. Imagine the audacity, barefoot acrobats, their bodies glistening with olive oil, sprinting toward a half-ton beast with horns like curved daggers. One misstep, one faltering handhold on those slick withers, and the ritual could end in gored flesh. Yet frescoes at Knossos capture these moments with startling grace, leapers frozen mid-somersault, their arched backs mirroring the bull's own powerful curve, as if human and animal had become two halves of a single divine movement. What's often missed about these ceremonies is their layered symbolism. The bull wasn't merely an obstacle, it embodied the raw, untamed forces of nature that the Minones both revered and sought to master. By vaulting over its back, the leapers weren't showing dominance, but harmony, a fleeting moment where humanity and animal instinct moved in perfect synchrony. Some scholars trace echoes of this ritual in later Greek myths, like Theseus navigating the labyrinth, suggesting bull leaping may have been a rite of passage for young elites. The bull's horns, often gilded for ceremonies, mirrored the crescent moon, tying the sport to lunar cycles and fertility cults. Even the leapers' costumes carried meaning. Men wore loincloths dyed with precious murex purple, while women, yes, women likely participated too, leapt in flounced skirts, their roles appending later gender norms. But here's the twist, bull leaping was as much about community as courage. The frescoes show teams working together, one distracting the bull by gripping its horns, another mid-flip, a third poised to catch the dismount. This wasn't solo heroism, it was a metaphor for societal interdependence. When the crowd roared as a leaper stuck the landing, they weren't just applauding skill. They were reaffirming a shared identity, one where danger and devotion intertwined. Modern parallels exist. Think of bull runs in Pamplona or rodeo riders, but the Minones elevated it to sacrament. Their leapers didn't perform for medals or money, but for the favor of the Earth Mother, whose serpentine statues watched from palace shrines. The legacy of these rituals lingers in unexpected ways. Archaeologists note that Minone bull leaping arenas were often built near tectonic fault lines, where the ground itself trembled unpredictably. In leaping over a creature as volatile as the quaking earth, the Minones may have been practicing something profound, the art of finding balance in an unstable world. Their flips and somersaults weren't just physical feats, they were philosophical statements, etched in sweat and adrenaline. Today, as parkour athletes vault urban obstacles or free climbers scale cliffs without ropes, we're still chasing that same primal high. The moment when skill, courage, and something beyond explanation collide. The longhouse reeked of iron and pine resin as the chieftain raised his ceremonial blade, not in anger, but in reverence. A Norse blot wasn't merely slaughter. It was a sacred negotiation where the spilling of blood opened a channel between Midgard and Asgard. Picture the scene, a winter's night so cold the mead froze in its horns, yet the assembly stood transfixed as the sacrificial stallion's blood arced into a bronze bowl. This was no random offering, every detail carried meaning. The horse, sacred to Odin, represented strength and fertility. Its blood would be sprinkled on the temple walls, the idols, even the gathered crowd, binding them all in a covenant with the gods. Then came the feast, the same animal roasted and shared among the clan, its flesh transforming from offering to sustenance in a single ritual. What set the Blot apart was its earthy pragmatism. Unlike distant deities of other pantheons, the Norse gods demanded participation. When warriors drank to Thor, they weren't just toasting a legend. They believed the thunder god might literally be sharing their mead bench in disguise. The ritual's genius lay in its duality. The same act that honored the divine also solved very human problems. In a land where winters starved communities, the Blot ensured meat was distributed fairly under divine scrutiny. The chieftain's role as sacrificer reinforced his authority. While the communal meal smoothed tensions, no one could feud with a man they just shared sacred pork with. Even the leftovers had purpose. Bones were cast into ritual fires, their cracks interpreted as messages from the spirit world. Archaeology reveals how deeply these rites permeated Viking life. At Tiso Lake in Denmark, excavations uncovered a feast site where centuries of Blot leftovers formed layers of animal skulls, all carefully split to extract the brains, considered the choicest offering. The choice of beasts told stories too. Goats for Thor, boars for Freya, ravens for Odin. But here's what's striking: the Vikings didn't just sacrifice what they could spare. Their finest breeding stock, their plumpest livestock, went to the gods first. This wasn't desperation, it was investment, a belief that generosity to the divine would be repaid tenfold in good harvests and victory. Modern reconstructions often miss the Blot's visceral intimacy. This wasn't some Soma temple rite. It was loud, messy, and alive with boasting and laughter. Skalds recited poetry between rounds of mead, their verses weaving the mundane into the mythical. A farmer's new plough became a gift from the dwarves. A teenager's first hunt echoed Odin's spear thrusts. By the fire's dying embers, as children gnawed on rib bones and elders recounted sagas, the boundary between daily life and legend blurred completely. The Vikings understood something profound. The sacred isn't separate from the world, it's the world aflame with meaning, where every meal, every story, every drop of spilled blood whispers of connections unseen. The moment the first winter swells rolled onto Hawaiian shores, a transformation swept through the islands, one so profound that even warriors laid down their spears. The Makahiki festival wasn't just a seasonal celebration. It was a societal reset, a sacred pause button pressed for 4 uninterrupted months. As the constellation Makale Pleiades appeared on the horizon, the people welcomed Lono, the god of peace and fertility, whose image, a tapa-clad pole adorned with feathers and copper cloth, was carried clockwise around each island in solemn procession. Imagine the scene: villages that had skirmished over fishing rights or territorial slights, now sharing emu pits where whole pigs roasted in banana leaves, their smoke curling skyward like offerings. Sports arenas carved into the earth echoed with the thump of holua sled races and the grunts of wrestlers, their competitions not just displays of skill but acts of devotion. What made Makahiki extraordinary was its enforcement of Kapu divine law. During these months, warfare wasn't merely discouraged, it was unthinkable, a violation punishable by death. Even the ally chiefs submitted to this higher order, traveling their territories to collect taxes in the form of food, cloth, and feathers, not as rulers but as Lono's stewards. The ritual's genius lay in its timing. These 4 months coincided with the rainy season, when farming and fishing were least productive. By mandating peace during scarcity, Makahiki prevented resource conflicts from spiraling into violence, ensuring communal survival. The tax system itself was a masterstroke. Offerings were stored in shared storehouses, acting as buffers against famine, but Makahiki's true power was psychological. The festival's closing ceremony, where a symbolic canoe laden with offerings was set adrift, served as a release valve. As the vessel disappeared beyond the reef, so too did the accumulated tensions of the year. When the kapu lifted and the first spears were resharpened, Hawaiians returned to ordinary life with renewed social bonds and full bellies. Modern parallels exist in our holiday truces or harvest festivals, but none match Makahiki's scale or sanctity. It was ecology disguised as theology, resource management dressed in divine decree, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't conquest but collective breath. The path to Mount Tai's summit wasn't just a climb, it was a vertigo-inducing test of divine worthiness, each step etched with the ghosts of emperors who dared the ascent before. The Feng Shan ceremony wasn't a coronation or a parade. It was a ruler's naked reckoning with the cosmos. Picture the journey, an emperor, draped in robes embroidered with celestial dragons, his procession snaking up 6,000 stone steps so steep they seemed to vanish into the clouds. Below, his subjects held their breath. Above, the heavens waited in judgment. This was no symbolic gesture. It was a high-stakes gamble where the prize was the mandate of heaven itself, and the penalty for failure could topple dynasties. What made Feng Shan so extraordinary was its brutal selectivity. Of China's hundreds of emperors, only 6 ever completed the ritual successfully, a fact that speaks volumes about its perceived danger. The ceremony unfolded in 2 acts. The Feng, where the ruler sealed a jade-inscribed report to heaven in a golden casket at the summit, and the Shan, where he buried another missive at the mountain's base, addressing Earth. The messages weren't boasts of conquests or tax revenues, but confessions, lists of failures, droughts mishandled, rebellions poorly quelled. This raw honesty was the ritual's genius. By acknowledging imperfection, emperors proved they understood their role as stewards, not tyrants. The climb itself was a metaphor. Just as the mountain slopes tested physical endurance, the ceremony tested moral fitness, weeding out rulers who lacked the humility to face celestial scrutiny. Archaeologists have found remnants of these ceremonies, fragments of jade tablets, charred remains of sacrifice pits, but the true power of Feng Shan lay in its intangibles. The mountain wasn't chosen randomly. Its eastern location marked it as where the sun's energy gathered, making it a natural antenna between realms. When an emperor burned his silken petitions, the smoke's direction was scrutinized like a divine Morse code, rising straight to heaven signaled approval, while wayward plumes hinted at celestial displeasure. Even the timing was cosmic. Ceremonies coincided with Jupiter's 12-year cycle, linking earthly rule to planetary movements. The Feng Shan's legacy endures in modern China's political theater, where legitimacy still hinges on perceived harmony with natural and cosmic forces. But its deeper lesson transcends borders. True authority isn't seized, but earned through rituals that expose rulers to forces beyond their control. Those 6 successful emperors understood something timeless, that the highest power comes not from commanding men, but from answering to something greater. Their jade tablets may have crumbled, but the message remains. Leadership is a conversation with the divine, and the mountain always has the last word. The red earth stretched endlessly under the outback sun, a vast canvas where every dune and dry riverbed held a story older than written language. For Aboriginal Australian boys on Walkabout, this wasn't just a journey across land, it was a pilgrimage through memory itself. Armed with nothing but a digging stick and the songlines passed down through generations, these youths embarked on solo treks that could last months, tracing invisible pathways etched into the desert by the creator beings of the Dreamtime. Picture a teenager standing at the base of Uluru at dawn, humming an ancient melody whose rhythms mirror the contours of the rock, a living map where music and landscape fuse into one. What made the walkabout extraordinary wasn't just survival skills, though learning to find water in witchetty grubs or track emus was essential. It was the ritual's seamless blending of practical education and sacred duty. Each songline functioned as an oral GPS, encoding navigation cues in verses that described landmarks, water sources, and celestial markers. A single phrase might translate to "turn left at the acacia shaped like a kangaroo's paw," while another warned of quicks and near a particular bend in a dry creek. But these weren't mere directions. They were chapters in an epic poem that tied the traveler to ancestors who'd walked the same path millennia earlier. When a boy sang his way across the desert, he wasn't just finding his route, he was reanimating the dream time itself, stepping into footprints that never faded. The walkabout's true genius lay in its psychological alchemy. By stripping away all social buffers, no clan, no weapons, just the unrelenting land, the ritual forged an unbreakable bond between identity and environment. A young man who'd followed his songline to the coast and back didn't just know his territory, he'd absorbed it into his bones, becoming a living extension of the ecosystem. Modern neuroscience might call this embodied cognition, but Aboriginal cultures understood it intuitively. To sing the land was to belong to it, and to belong was to protect. Even the ritual's dangers served a purpose. Encountering a storm or a venomous snake wasn't misfortune, but a dialogue with ancestral spirits testing resolve. Today, as satellites map every inch of the planet, the walkabout's legacy persists in unexpected ways. Astronauts training for Mars missions study Aboriginal navigation techniques to hone their spatial memory, while psychologists recognize songlines as masterclasses in mnemonic learning. But perhaps its most profound lesson is this: in a world of GPS and instant gratification, there's still power in moving slowly enough to hear the earth sing back. Those desert paths, invisible to outsiders, remind us that every landscape holds stories, if we're willing to walk them into being. The stone court stretched long and narrow beneath the jungle canopy, its sloped walls echoing with the thunderous bounce of a solid rubber ball. This was Pakoccha, not a game, but a sacred drama where players weren't just athletes, but actors in a story older than the pyramids themselves. The rules sound simple: keep the heavy ball in play using only hips, elbows, and knees, scoring by driving it through stone rings mounted high on the walls. But every movement carried cosmic weight. The ball symbolized the sun's perilous journey across the sky. The court represented the world, and the players reenacted the eternal battle between the hero twins and the lords of the underworld from Mayan mythology. What made Pakoccha extraordinary was its brutal duality. Archaeologists have found carvings showing some matches ending with decapitations, not of the losing team, but often the victors, their blood spilled as the ultimate offering. This wasn't random violence. It mirrored the myth where the victorious hero twins willingly faced death to resurrect their father, the maize god. The court itself was designed as a portal between realms, with the ball's trajectory mimicking the sun's descent into the underworld and its rebound symbolizing rebirth. When a player's hip struck that 8-pound sphere with enough force to send it through the ring, a feat so rare it sometimes ended the game instantly, it wasn't just a score. It was a celestial event, a fleeting moment when the human and divine realms aligned perfectly. The game's deeper genius lay in its social function. Unlike modern sports with clear winners and losers, Pakoccha often served as a ritual alternative to warfare. City-states on the brink of conflict might settle disputes through a ceremonial match, with bloodshed contained to the court rather than battlefields. The rubber for the balls came from distant groves, traded across Mesoamerica like sacred currency, binding distant kingdoms through shared ritual. Even the players' protective gear, stone yokes strapped around their waists, padded arm guards, evolved into ornate status symbols, some inlaid with jade worth a farmer's lifetime of labor. Modern reconstructions struggle to capture Pak'atuk's physical toll. The ball's momentum could shatter ribs, and the stone courts baked under the Yucatan sun like open kilns. Yet for the Maya, this suffering wasn't incidental. It was the point. Just as maize must die to feed humanity, just as the sun must descend each night to rise again, the player's ordeal mirrored the painful cycles that sustained existence. Today, as archaeologists debate whether the rings represented celestial portals or serpent mouths, and descendants of the Maya still play a ceremonial version called ulama, one truth endures: some games aren't meant to be won, but to remind us that every victory requires sacrifice, and every dawn demands its drop of blood. The first day of spring arrived not with a whisper, but with the thunder of brooms against Persian carpets and the scent of hyacinths spilling from every window. Nowruz wasn't just a new year, it was a revolution against winter's decay, a 13-day symphony of rituals so potent they've survived empires, invasions, and the march of millennia. Picture this: families gathered around the Haft-Sin table, its 7 symbolic items: sprouted wheat for rebirth, apples for health, garlic for protection, arranged with the precision of a sacred equation. Outside, bonfires crackled in the twilight, their flames beckoning villagers to leap over the embers, shouting, "Give me your redness, take my paleness." This wasn't mere superstition, it was alchemy, trading winter's sickness for summer's vitality through the purifying kiss of fire. What set Nowruz apart was its breathtaking scope, a fusion of Zoroastrian cosmology, agrarian wisdom, and domestic devotion. The ritual spring cleaning wasn't just about dusting shelves. It mirrored the cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda's light and Angra Mainyu's darkness. Even the humblest peasant understood: scrubbing one's home cleared space for divine blessings. The festival's climax on the 13th day, Sizda Badar, saw entire communities picnic in nature, casting sprouted greens into flowing water, a symbolic release of negativity that doubled as brilliant agricultural science, returning nutrients to the soil just as planting season began. Nowruz's genius lay in its elasticity. When Islam swept through Persia, the festival didn't vanish. It absorbed new layers, blending Quranic verses with ancient fire hymns. Centuries later, even the secular embraced it as a cultural touchstone. Today, from Tehran to Los Angeles, diaspora families still set the Haft-Sin table, though some items evolve. A Bitcoin wallet might sit beside Samanu pudding now. The fires still burn, though urbanites often substitute candles for bonfires. This adaptability reveals a profound truth. Rituals don't survive by staying frozen, but by becoming vessels for each generation's hopes. Modern scientists might explain the fire jumping as germ-killing heat therapy, or the sprouted wheat as a vitamin-rich pre-spring boost. But for those who have felt the collective gasp as the year turns, who have tasted the first bite of sabzi polo with family after months apart, Nowruz offers something no textbook can: the electric sense of participating in something timeless, where every cleaned closet and leaped flame stitches you into a story that began long before you and will continue long after. The fires may dwindle to embers, but the light never truly goes out. The drums spoke first, deep, resonant pulses that seemed to rise from the earth itself, calling the ancestors home. In the flickering firelight of a southern African homestead, bare feet pounded the packed dirt in rhythms older than memory, each step a deliberate summons. This was Ukubaisa, the Bantu ritual of bringing back the departed, where the living didn't just remember their ancestors, they danced with them. Picture the scene, elders draped in beads that clinked like distant voices, their bodies swaying in patterns passed down through countless generations. The air thick with the scent of burning impefo herbs, believed to carry prayers skyward. A calabash of beer, frothing with fermentation, placed carefully at the edge of the circle, not as an offering left behind, but as a shared drink between worlds. What made Yukubaisa extraordinary was its intimacy. Unlike grand temple ceremonies or public sacrifices, this ritual unfolded in family spaces, a courtyard, a cattle kraal, the shade of a sacred umsamo tree. The dead weren't distant deities, they were grandmothers who'd braided your hair, uncles who'd taught you to herd. When a dancer's movement suddenly shifted, their shoulders rolling with unfamiliar grace or their voice dropping into tones no living throat could mimic, the family knew someone had answered. Archaeologists have found traces of these rituals in Iron Age sites, potsherds arranged in circles, pits filled with ritual ash, but the true magic lived in the unbroken oral traditions. A Xhosa elder might point to a particular rock formation and recount how, 3 generations back, a rainmaker's spirit once appeared there during Yukubaisa, ending a drought with her spectral tears. The ceremony's brilliance lay in its dual purpose. On one level, it honored the dead, but it also served as a living archive. As elders recounted family histories during the ritual, they wove practical knowledge into the stories. Which fields yielded the best harvests after locust swarms, which herbal remedies had saved children during fevers. The ancestors weren't merely worshipped, they were consulted, their wisdom accessed through trance and symbol. A Zulu diviner might interpret the way beer bubbles burst on the calabash's surface as guidance on where to dig a new well. Even the cattle played a role, their horns often anointed with ochre, linking the living herd to the spectral one's ancestors tended in the spirit world. Modern adaptations reveal Yukubaisa's resilience. In urban townships today, families might substitute store-bought candles for traditional herbs or use recorded drum beats when live musicians aren't available. Yet the core remains unchanged, a belief that the departed aren't gone, just momentarily unseen, and that the right rhythms, the right sense, the right words can pull them close enough to whisper. Scientists might dismiss the trance states as dopamine surges or cultural conditioning, but for those who have felt a grandmother's touch in a sudden breeze during the dance, or heard a child laugh in the exact pitch of a long-gone uncle, no explanation is needed. The drums still speak, the feet still answer, and the circle between living and dead remains unbroken. The air in the temple hung heavy with the scent of crushed dates and myrrh as the priestess prepared to become a bride, not to any mortal man but to a god. In the heart of ancient Sumer, the sacred marriage ceremony wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was the linchpin holding together the very cycle of life. Each year, a chosen priestess, often the high priestess of Inanna, would ascend to the temple's innermost chamber, its walls adorned with lapis lazuli and gold. There she would enact the divine union with Dumuzi, the shepherd god of fertility, their ritual coupling believed to awaken the earth's generative powers. The hymns sung during these rites left little to the imagination, lyrics praising the loins of Dumuzi and the honey-filled womb of the goddess painted a vivid picture of sacred eroticism as the ultimate act of creation. But here's where the ritual took a fascinating political turn. By the time of the Roman III dynasty, kings had begun stepping into Dumuzi's role, literally climbing the temple steps to enact the ceremony themselves. This wasn't mere pageantry, it was a masterstroke of statecraft. When a ruler like Shulgi of played the part of the god, he wasn't just guaranteeing abundant harvests, he was fusing his earthly authority with divine mandate. The priestess's participation transformed from purely religious duty to a form of political endorsement, her body becoming the symbolic meeting point of heaven and throne. Texts from the period describe kings receiving the rites of Dumuzi as part of their coronation, effectively making them responsible for the land's fertility alongside its justice and defense. Archaeological evidence reveals how deeply this ritual permeated Sumerian life. Cylinder seals depict the sacred marriage scene with startling consistency, the priestess seated on a throne-like bed, the ruler standing before her with offerings, their figures often flanked by sheaves of grain and flowing vases. Even the timing was precise. The ceremony coincided with the spring equinox, aligning human action with celestial patterns. But the ritual's true brilliance lay in its dual accountability. Should famine strike after the ceremony, the king's divine connection became suspect, undermining his legitimacy. The priestess, in turn, held immense soft power. Her willingness to participate served as a silent referendum on the ruler's fitness. Modern parallels emerge in unexpected places. The blending of romantic and political symbolism in royal weddings, the way leaders still invoke divine favor during crises, these echo the sacred marriage legacy. Yet the Sumerians understood something we've largely forgotten. That governance isn't just about laws and armies, but about maintaining an unspoken covenant with the forces that sustain life itself. When that priestess and king, or king playing god, joined in ritual, they weren't just performing. They were reminding everyone that true power comes not from domination, but from the ability to make the earth itself respond. High on the wind-whipped plateaus of Tibet, where the air thins to a razor's edge and the horizon stretches into eternity, death takes flight literally. The Tibetan sky burial, or jeta, isn't merely a funeral rite. It's the ultimate act of Buddhist compassion, where the human body becomes its final offering. Picture this: a Rogyapa, or body breaker, unwrapping a white shroud on a remote mountain-top altar as dozens of Himalayan vultures circle overhead. With practiced strokes, he dismembers the corpse, not in secrecy, but in sacred daylight, while mourners chant prayers to guide the soul through the bardo, the transitional state between lives. The blades used are often dull, intentionally slowing the process to mirror the Buddhist teaching that detachment comes gradually, never easily. What makes this ritual extraordinary isn't just its stark contrast to Western burial customs, it's how perfectly it embodies core Buddhist principles. In a land where frozen ground makes earth burial nearly impossible and scarce timber turns cremation into a luxury for lamas alone, sky burial solves practical problems with profound spirituality. The vultures, known as dakinis or sky dancers, aren't seen as scavengers but as divine intermediaries carrying the deceased to the pure realms. This mirrors the Mahayana Buddhist concept of dana, or selfless giving. By offering their flesh to sustain other beings, the dead perform one last act of generosity, dissolving the ego's final attachment to the physical form. The ritual's psychological power lies in its unflinching confrontation with mortality. Families often watch the entire process, from the first incision to the moment the last bone fragment is crushed with barley flour for the birds. There's no coffin to hide decay, no embalming to simulate sleep, just the visceral truth that all bodies, whether pauper or monk, return to the elements equally. Modern visitors sometimes misinterpret this as harsh, but for Tibetans, it's the opposite, a kindness that prevents loved ones from clinging to illusions of permanence. Even the timing reflects Buddhist non-attachment. Sky burials typically occur at dawn, as the first light touches the mountains, a daily reminder that endings are also beginnings. Archaeologists have discovered sky burial sites adorned with carved mantras and prayer flags fluttering like winged sentinels. but the ritual's true brilliance is in its ecological harmony. Unlike cemeteries that sequester death or cremations that release carbon, Jeta completes a zero-waste cycle where nothing is taken from the earth and nothing remains to pollute it. In an age of environmental crisis, this ancient practice feels startlingly contemporary, a reminder that the most sustainable traditions often emerge from spiritual wisdom rather than scientific innovation. When those vultures lift into the azure sky, their wings heavy with the weight of a human life given freely, they carry more than flesh. They carry a philosophy that has weathered centuries because it asks the hardest, most beautiful question of all. What greater gift could there be than becoming part of everything again? The streets of ancient Rome erupted in a frenzy of bare skin and laughter every February 15th, as the Lupercalia festival turned the city into a theater of primal energy. This wasn't mere revelry, it was a ritual so visceral it blurred the line between sacred and scandalous. Imagine the scene: young men, clad only in loincloths cut from freshly sacrificed goats, sprinting from the Lupercal cave where Romulus and Remus were said to be nursed by the she-wolf. Armed with strips of the same goat hide, they lashed out at women who lined their path, not in violence, but in a collective act of ritual fertility magic. The women didn't flee, they bared their palms and laughed, believing each stinging strike increased their chances of conception and easy childbirth. What made Lupercalia extraordinary was its chaotic duality. On one hand, it honored Faunus, the horned god of flocks and wilderness, with blood sacrifices and feasting. On the other, it served as Rome's great social pressure valve, a sanctioned day when aristocrats and plebeians alike could shed societal constraints along with their clothing. The Luperci, the festival's elite participants, weren't random hooligans but often patrician youths, their nakedness temporarily erasing class distinctions. Even the act of striking women carried layered meaning. The goat hide symbolized purification. Goats were sacred to Juno, protector of women, while the blows themselves mimicked the gentle swatting Roman midwives gave newborns to stimulate breath, a symbolic rebirth for the city itself. The ritual's evolution reveals how paganism and later traditions intertwined. When Pope Gelasius I tried banning Lupercalia in the 5th century, Romans clung to it stubbornly. His solution, rebranding. The festival's fertility themes were softened into chaste expressions of affection. Its date shifted slightly to coincide with the martyrdom of Saint Valentine. The lottery pairing of couples during Lupercalia, where men drew women's names from jars, morphed into Valentine's cards centuries later. Even the color red, now ubiquitous for romance, traces back to the sacrificial goat blood smeared on Luperci foreheads before their mad dash through Rome. Modern celebrations still echo this ancient frenzy. The light-hearted spanking games at Carnival in Venice or the playful whip cracking during certain Slavic spring festivals all descend from similar purification rites. But Lupercalia's true legacy lies deeper, in our collective understanding that fertility isn't just biological but cultural. Rome's survival depended on robust birth rates, and this ritual made that necessity sacred through adrenaline and laughter rather than grim obligation. Today, as we exchange heart-shaped chocolates in February, we're unwitting participants in a chain stretching back to goat hide lashes and the laughter of women who knew. Sometimes the most profound magic wears the guise of chaos. The scales in the Hall of Two Truths didn't just measure weight. They measured a lifetime of choices, each heartbeat distilled into a single, terrifying moment of cosmic justice. Egyptian mythology paints this scene with chilling precision. The deceased standing before Osiris, their heart placed on one golden scale, balanced against Maat's feather on the other. But this wasn't some abstract judgment. It was the ultimate accountability ritual, where morality became physics. and the fate of one's eternal soul hung on a feather's delicate equilibrium. Imagine the silence as the scale's needle quivered, the ibis-headed Thoth standing ready to record the verdict, and the monstrous Ammit lurking nearby, her crocodile jaws and lion's body tensed to devour any heart that tipped the balance. What made this ritual extraordinary wasn't just its drama, but its psychological brilliance. The feather represented Maat, truth, order, harmony, but also something more personal, the weightlessness of a clear conscience. Ancient Egyptians believed sins literally thickened the heart, a physical manifestation of guilt. The 42 assessor gods, each linked to specific moral tests. Have I stolen? Have I lied? Turned the afterlife into the world's most rigorous ethics exam. But here's the twist: the deceased didn't plead innocence outright. They recited the negative confession, asserting, "I have not," for each sin, effectively performing their own moral audit before divine witnesses. Archaeologists have found heart scarabs buried with mummies, inscribed with spells imploring the heart not to betray its owner. These weren't mere trinkets, they were ritual insurance, words carved in stone to outwit the scales. The ceremony's genius lay in its duality, terrifying enough to enforce societal order, yet hopeful enough to motivate self-improvement. A heavy heart meant annihilation, but a balanced one earned eternal life in the field of reeds. Modern psychology might call this externalized conscience, but the Egyptians understood something deeper, that true morality requires both the threat of consequence and the promise of transcendence. The ritual's legacy endures in our courthouse scales and expressions like light-hearted, but its true power was in making ethics visceral. When an Egyptian baker hesitated to shortchange a customer or a scribe considered falsifying records, they didn't just fear earthly punishment. They saw Ammit's jaws, felt the phantom weight of their own heart, and understood some judgments aren't deferred until death. They're written in the body itself, waiting for the day the feather floats and all excuses turn to dust. The ocean whispered danger as the fisherman's paddle hovered above the water, his muscles tense with forbidden longing. Just beyond the reef, a school of silver fish darted through the shallow's plentiful, easy prey. But the cove was tapu, marked by the chief's warning of crossed palm fronds. To ignore them meant more than a fine. It risked unleashing unseen forces that could sour crops, summon storms, or curse generations. Across the Pacific, from Aotearoa to Rapa Nui, this invisible web of sacred restrictions wasn't superstition. It was the operating system of Polynesian civilization, governing everything from turtle hunting to childbirth with terrifying precision. What set the tapu system apart was its elegant adaptability. A freshly caught tuna might be tapu for commoners until the chief's blessing, ensuring equitable food distribution during lean seasons. A newly built canoe became tapu until ritual purification, preventing reckless voyages. Even the shadow of a high-ranking ally was tapu to tread upon, a living reminder of the divine hierarchy that kept society intact. The genius lay in its dual nature. Some tapu were permanent, like the sacred groves where gods were believed to walk, while others were temporary, lifting after ceremonies or lunar cycles. Archaeologists have found evidence of these rules etched into the landscape. Terraces in Hawaii where only priests could plant certain crops, or fishing grounds in Tonga, marked by stone altars where commoners made offerings before casting nets. The rituals to lift tapu were as intricate as the restrictions themselves. In Tahiti, breaking a chief's tapu might require presenting a sacrificial pig while chanting a genealogical apology that traced lineage back to the gods. Maori Tohunga priests used karakia incantations and sprinkled seawater from sacred gourds to purify violated spaces. These weren't mere punishments. They were spiritual resets, restoring balance through acts of humility and remembrance. The system's brilliance shone brightest in resource management. By declaring certain fishing grounds or fruiting trees tapu for seasons at a time, Polynesians practiced sustainable ecology centuries before the concept existed. Modern parallels emerge in surprising places. The Hawaiian concept of kapu aloha during the Mauna Kea protests, blending ancient reverence with contemporary activism, shows tapu's enduring power. Even our mundane, keep-out signs and private property laws echo this ancient logic of boundaries and consequences. But what we've lost is the holistic vision that made tapu more than rules. It was a language the whole universe spoke. When a Polynesian navigator avoided a tapu island, he wasn't just obeying tradition, he was listening to the ocean itself, acknowledging that some lines aren't drawn in sand, but in the fabric of existence. The autumn wind carried whispers of the otherworld as the last harvest was gathered, leaving fields skeletal under a swollen orange moon. Samhain wasn't merely a Celtic festival marking summer's end. It was the night when the veil between worlds frayed like old cloth, allowing spirits to slip through like cold fingers reaching for the living. Picture the scene, villages ringed by towering bonfires, their flames licking at the darkness as families placed offerings of apples and barley cakes on doorsteps, not as gifts but as bargains. "Eat this, not us," the gesture seemed to say, a delicate dance of hospitality and self-preservation. The disguises worn that night weren't costumes in our modern sense. They were acts of sacred deception, hides and masks transforming wearers into animals or monsters to confuse vengeful ghosts. A child smeared with ash might become invisible to the sluwog, those restless dead who rode the storm winds, while a man crowned with antlers could trick spirits into thinking him one of their own. What set Samhain apart was its embrace of paradox, a night both joyous and terrifying, where feasting and fear walked hand in hand. The same bonfires that warded off malevolent forces also served as communal hearths, where villagers burned symbolic straw effigies to purge the year's misfortunes. Cattle were driven between twin flames for purification, their hides singed by embers believed to carry protective magic. Even the act of carving turnips, later pumpkins in the New World, held dual meaning. The grotesque faces warded spirits away, while the candlelight within honored benevolent ancestors invited to join the living for one night. Archaeologists have found pits near ancient settlements filled with animal bones and broken pottery, remnants of feasts where every family contributed a portion to feed both the living and the dead, blurring the line between supper and sacrifice. The ritual's genius lay in its psychological catharsis. By giving form to the fear of death, literally inviting the unseen into the firelight, the Celts transformed dread into manageable ritual. The dumb supper tradition, where place settings were laid for departed loved ones in complete silence, allowed grief to surface within strict boundaries. When youths raced through fields with hollowed-out gourds as lanterns, their laughter wasn't defiance of the dark. It was a collective exhale, a way to mock what frightened them most. Modern Halloween's trick-or-treating echoes this dynamic. The treat appeasing spirits as ancient offerings once did, the trick channeling the chaos of a night when rules were suspended. Even our obsession with haunted houses and horror movies taps into Samhain's ancient bargain: confine terror to a single night, and the rest of the year remains safe. Yet Samhain's deepest legacy might be its view of time as a wheel, not a line. The Celts saw this night as existing outside ordinary chronology, a crack in reality where past, present, and future bled together. Divination rituals flourished, apple peels tossed over shoulders to reveal lovers' initials, nuts crackling in hearth fires foretelling marriages, mirrors positioned to catch glimpses of next year's face. This wasn't mere superstition. It was an acknowledgement that some truths are only visible when the walls between worlds grow thin. Today, as we snap photos in haunted locations or play with Ouija boards at Halloween parties, we're reaching for that same fleeting connection, not to ghosts, perhaps, but to the parts of ourselves that only emerge when the ordinary rules are stripped away and the ancient, wild night whispers our name. The streets of Jain communities fall into an extraordinary hush during Paryushana, not the quiet of absence, but the profound silence of collective introspection. For 8 days each year, the world's most stringent adherents of non-violence turn inward, their fasting so severe that some consume only boiled water after sunset, while others abstain from all food entirely. But this isn't merely physical discipline. It's a ritualized reckoning with every ripple of harm one's existence may have caused, intentional or not. Picture a businessman kneeling before his employees, a mother asking her child's forgiveness for raising her voice, scholars publicly apologizing to books they've mishandled, because in Jain cosmology, even neglectful page-turning can bruise the microscopic life believed to inhabit paper's fibers. At the heart of Paryushana lies the ancient practice of pratikramana, a twilight recitation where Jains methodically review their year through the lens of their 5 foundational vows. Non-violence, ahimsa, comes first, extending beyond physical harm to include harsh words or even harmful thoughts. Truthfulness, satya, is examined next, probing not just lies but exaggerations that might mislead. The vows of non-stealing, chastity, and non-possession are dissected with equal rigor, each revealing how daily actions, buying extra shoes, wasting water, might unknowingly perpetuate harm. What makes this ritual revolutionary is its radical equality. Monks and millionaires alike perform the same confessions, their social hierarchies erased before the universal scale of ethical accountability. The festival's climax, Samvatsari, transforms apology into art. Communities engage in Michchami Dukkadam, a phrase meaning, "May my faults be dissolved," exchanged not as casual pleasantry but with deliberate eye contact and folded hands. Historians trace this custom to Emperor Chandragupta Maurya's legendary public atonement after a famine linked to his policies, proof that remorse could humble even kings. Modern Jains have adapted the ritual for digital spaces, sending forgiveness messages across continents, yet the physicality remains vital. Some touch the feet of those they've wronged, while others perform elaborate chalk drawings of forgiveness, symbols later washed away by rain, embodying impermanence. Archaeological evidence reveals how Paryushana's ethics shaped civilization. Digs at ancient Jain sites show unique water filters in every household, silk cloths to strain microbes, and manuscripts prescribing specific walking techniques to avoid crushing insects. This wasn't mere fastidiousness, it was the lived expression of a philosophy where every pebble might contain a soul. Today, as ecologists study Jain temple forests, some of India's most biodiverse, they recognize how radical non-violence created accidental sanctuaries. The ritual's true brilliance lies in its dual focus, personal purification and cosmic responsibility, proving that the smallest acts of restraint can echo across ecosystems and centuries. When a Jain sweeps the ground before sitting or covers their mouth to protect airborne organisms, they're not following empty ritual. They're participating in a civilization's longest-running experiment. Can humanity exist without leaving scars? Paryushana's answer is written in starved bodies and softened voices, a whisper that sometimes the holiest act isn't creation but cessation. The chosen one stood at the pinnacle of Aztec society, his body sculpted by luxury, his every whim indulged, yet his fate was sealed from the moment priests crowned him with turquoise and eagle feathers. The Toxcatl ceremony wasn't just another sacrifice. It was a year-long performance where a flawless youth became the living incarnation of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god, before his heart was torn out on the Great Pyramid summit. Imagine the paradox. This young man, selected for his beauty and grace, spent 12 months draped in gold and jade, learning to play the flute like a noble, attended by servants who treated him as divine. He walked through Tenochtitlan's streets with flowers strewn at his feet, crowds prostrating themselves not in pity, but in awe of the sacred transformation unfolding before them. What made Toxcatl uniquely unsettling was its meticulous choreography of consent. Unlike prisoners of war dragged screaming to altars, this youth embraced his role with eerie serenity. 20 days before his death, he married 4 maidens representing goddesses, their union symbolizing fertility and cosmic balance. As his final hours approached, he broke his flutes one by one on temple steps, each snap marking his detachment from earthly pleasures. The ritual's climax was a hauntingly beautiful procession, the incarnate god climbing the pyramid alone, shedding his ornaments like a snake shedding skin, until he stood naked before the obsidian knife. His last act, voluntarily stretching across the sacrificial stone, his chest arching toward the sky in perfect offering. Archaeologists studying Toxcatl note its psychological genius. By elevating the victim to near divinity, the Aztecs transformed horror into honor, making his death not a punishment but an apotheosis. Spanish chroniclers recorded that some youths reportedly smiled as the priest's blade descended, a detail so unsettling it fueled European propaganda about Aztec barbarity. But modern scholars see something far more complex, a ritual that blurred the line between victim and volunteer, where the act of dying became the ultimate performance art. The broken flutes left at temple sites suggest meticulous staging, the care taken with the youth's appearance, his skin oiled, his hair braided with cotton threads, reveals a ceremony obsessed with aesthetic perfection. The ceremony's deeper purpose was societal alchemy. In a civilization where war captives typically faced sacrifice, Toxcatl presented an alternative narrative, one where the most precious offering came from within Aztec society itself. By choosing someone flawless, then lavishing him with comforts before his annihilation, the ritual reinforced a brutal but potent message. Even the privileged weren't exempt from the god's demands. When commoners watched this paragon of beauty and talent willingly embrace death, it legitimized their own lesser sacrifices, their corn offerings, their bloodletting rituals. Toxcatl was the ultimate solidarity mechanism, proving no one, not even the divine stand-in, was above the cosmic balance. Today, the ceremony's legacy lingers in uncomfortable questions about how societies sanctify suffering. The Toxcatl Youth Year of Luxury parallels modern death row, inmates' final meals, or the ancient Roman condemned given a day of feasting. These rituals don't just soften brutality, they frame it as transcendent, turning victims into willing participants in their own destruction. The Aztecs understood something primal about human psychology, that will accept almost anything if it's wrapped in sacred theater, if the doomed are first crowned in flowers and gold. When those final flute notes faded over Tenochtitlan, they didn't signal despair but completion, a terrible, beautiful reminder that in the Aztec worldview, the most precious gifts often required the giver's obliteration. Beneath the autumn olives of ancient Greece, a silence fell over the countryside as women from every stratum of society vanished for 3 days, not in hiding but in sacred seclusion. The Thesmophoria was no ordinary festival. It was a whispered revolution, a rare moment when the rigid boundaries of Greek gender roles didn't just bend but shattered entirely. Picture the scene: priestesses of Demeter leading processions of married women up rocky hillsides, their baskets heavy with pine cones and cakes shaped like genitalia, their laughter carrying an edge of liberation. Inside walled sanctuaries, rituals unfolded that no man could witness on pain of death. The most startling act involved retrieving the rotting remains of piglets buried months earlier during the Skira festival, their decayed flesh mixed with seeds to become potent fertilizer. This wasn't mere agrarian magic, it was alchemy of the darkest kind, transforming death into fertility, secrecy into power. The genius of the Thesmophoria lay in its dangerous duality. By excluding men completely, even male slaves were barred. It created a sacred space where women temporarily controlled the most vital forces of civilization: food production and human reproduction. The piglets, sacrificed and buried in underground chambers called megara, symbolized this paradox. Their decomposition mirrored Demeter's grief when Persephone descended to Hades, while their resurrection as agricultural blessing echoed Persephone's cyclical return. Athenian men might dismiss the festival as women's nonsense, but their very survival depended on its success. Records show city-states delayed military campaigns until after the Thesmophoria, knowing the harvest and, by extension, the army's food supply hinged on these rites. Even the festival's timing was subversive. Held just before planting season, it reminded society that while men owned the land, women held the keys to its fruitfulness. Archaeological finds at Thesmophoria sites reveal tantalizing clues about these secretive rituals. Excavations have uncovered miniature pig figurines in sanctuaries, suggesting symbolic substitutions for those who couldn't afford live sacrifices. Broken pottery inscriptions hint at a ritual called the jesting, where women exchanged obscenities, possibly reenacting the myth of Iamb, whose crude jokes made grieving Demeter laugh. The most provocative discoveries are the remains of temporary sleeping quarters, proving participants lived communally during the festival, forging bonds that transcended class. A noblewoman might share a straw mat with a baker's wife, their shared secrecy leveling social hierarchies in ways unimaginable in the Agora. What modern observers often miss is how the Thesmophoria reframed female biology as sacred rather than shameful. The pig's blood mirrored menstruation, the rotting flesh evoked childbirth's messiness, all sanctified under Demeter's gaze. In a culture that confined respectable women to shadowed courtyards, these rituals celebrated the very aspects of womanhood that patriarchy deemed unclean. The festival's name itself, the carrying of things laid down, hinted at this reclamation, suggesting buried truths being brought back to light. When those women emerged from seclusion, their hair wreathed with myrtle and their hands stained with fertile muck, they carried more than ritual objects. They carried the unspoken knowledge that society's foundations rested on labor men would never see and mysteries they would never control. Today, the Thesmophoria's legacy lingers in unexpected places. The Eleusinian Mysteries borrowed its themes of death and rebirth, while modern feminist spirituality circles echo its celebration of cyclic wisdom. But its most profound lesson was about the power of controlled exclusion. By carving out a space where women's knowledge became the highest authority, the festival didn't just sanctify gender roles, it revealed their fragility. The pigs buried in those pits weren't just offerings to Demeter, they were seeds of a radical idea, that sometimes the most transformative rituals happen where the dominant gaze cannot follow. The pre-dawn air hums with devotion as barefoot women in bright saris wade into the sacred rivers, their arms trembling under the weight of bamboo baskets filled with offerings. Hath Puja isn't merely a festival, it's a 4-day marathon of faith where devotees become living bridges between earth and sky, their bodies pushed to brutal limits in pursuit of divine connection. Picture the scene, millions standing waist-deep in the Ganges or Yamuna rivers, their hands raised toward the rising sun, their lips moving in silent prayer even as their muscles scream for relief. This is no casual dip. Some remain immersed for 6 hours straight, their feet rooted in the riverbed like human reeds, their fasting so strict that not even water passes their lips during daylight hours. What makes Ch Puja extraordinary isn't just its physical demands, but its radical egalitarianism. Billionaires and beggars stand shoulder to shoulder in the same waters, their shared suffering erasing caste and class. The rituals follow an unbroken rhythm. Day 1 begins with holy immersion and a meal of pumpkin curry and rice. The last solid food participants will eat for nearly 72 hours. Day 2 brings a sunrise to sunset fast so rigorous that even saliva isn't swallowed. Devotees spit into clay pots to avoid breaking their vow. By day 3, when the river vigil begins, the body's protests fade into the background, replaced by a trance-like focus on Surya, the sun god who sustains all life. The offerings themselves reveal the ritual's deep ecological wisdom. Bamboo baskets filled with sugarcane, coconuts, and thekua, a biscuit made of wheat flour and jaggery, aren't just symbolic. They're packed with electrolytes and slow-release sugars to sustain fasters. The act of standing in flowing water, scientists note, stimulates circulation and reduces swelling, an ancient biohack disguised as devotion. Even the timing is physiologically precise. The final prayers coincide with solar zenith, when UV rays are strongest, allowing the sun to purify offerings of water and milk poured in perfect golden streams. Ch's true power lies in its inversion of ordinary worship. Unlike temple rituals where priests mediate the divine, here every participant becomes their own conduit. When a woman balances her basket on the river's surface at sunrise, her trembling hands aren't just holding fruit, they're cradling the universe's fragile balance. Modern India may have bullet trains and skyscrapers, but during these 4 days, time slows to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, proving that some connections can't be digitized. The sun doesn't care if you're rich or poor, only that you're willing to meet it halfway, knee-deep in sacred waters, your shadow merging with the light. The Great Plains stretched endlessly under the merciless summer sun as the cottonwood tree at the center of the lodge stood stripped of its branches, its trunk transformed into a sacred axis between earth and sky. The sun dance wasn't merely a ceremony, it was a visceral symphony of pain, prayer, and transcendence, where dancers pushed their bodies beyond human limits in pursuit of visions and collective renewal. For 4 days and nights, participants moved in relentless circles around the tree, their feet kicking up dust, their voices hoarse from chanting, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the sacred and the physical worlds blurred. Some pledged to dance without food or water. Others underwent the ultimate test of devotion, having their chests or backs pierced with wooden skewers, the wounds tied to the tree with rawhide ropes. As they leaned back, their weight tearing against flesh, the agony wasn't seen as suffering but as an offering, each drop of blood a prayer made tangible. What set the sun dance apart was its profound duality, a ritual equally intimate and communal. The dancers' ordeal was deeply personal, their fasts and piercings tailored to individual vows, yet every step and cry reverberated through the entire tribe. Elders recounted how a single dancer's vision could foretell buffalo migrations or heal a sick child, proving the ritual's power to channel unseen forces. The cottonwood tree itself was no passive prop. Chosen after days of prayer, its placement mirrored the Lakota belief in the sacred hoop of life, with roots digging into the underworld and branches brushing the heavens. When dancers finally tore free from their tethers, The scars left behind weren't just marks of endurance, they were living signatures of a covenant between the people and the Great Spirit. European settlers misunderstood this ritual as barbaric, banning it for decades, but the sun dance's true brutality lay in its spiritual precision. The skewers didn't pierce randomly, they avoided major muscles and arteries, a testament to generations of anatomical knowledge passed down through oral tradition. The timing coincided with the summer solstice, when the sun's energy was believed to be strongest, and the circular dance pattern mirrored celestial movements. Even the collapse of exhausted dancers held meaning. Those who fell were thought to briefly touch the spirit world, their visions interpreted as guidance for the tribe. Archaeologists have found stone medicine wheels aligning with solstice sunrises, suggesting the dance's roots stretch back millennia, long before horses or tipis reshaped plains culture. The ritual's resurgence in modern times speaks to its unshakable relevance. Today, sun dances are performed with surgical gloves and antibiotics, but the core remains unchanged, a defiant assertion that some truths can only be earned through sacrifice. Veterans with PTSD have reported profound healing after participating, their psychological wounds mirrored by physical ones. Environmental activists invoke the dance's teachings, framing climate change as a disruption of the sacred hoop. The sun dance endures not as a relic but as a challenge. In a world obsessed with comfort, it asks what we're still willing to endure for what we hold holy. The cottonwood may eventually wither, and the dancer's scars may fade, but the question lingers like the drum's echo: how deep will you dig to find the strength that ties us all together? The temple walls trembled not from earthquake or siege, but from the sheer force of 100 voices chanting in perfect unison, words so potent they were believed to stitch the universe together at its seams. The Enuma Elish wasn't merely recited during Babylon's Akitu festival. It was re-performed with the urgency of surgeons restarting a heart, each syllable a shockwave to jolt creation back into balance. Imagine the scene: priests in layered robes of indigo and gold standing shoulder to shoulder in the Esagila temple, their hands gripping clay tablets inscribed with the epic's 1091 lines, their throats raw from hours of invocation. As they reached the climax, Marduk's victory over the chaos dragon Tiamat, the entire city held its breath. For in that moment, the Babylonians weren't just remembering a myth, they were reenacting the very forces that kept their crops growing and rivers flowing. What made this ritual extraordinary was its precision. The recitation wasn't a free-form performance but a meticulous oral engineering project. Specific lines corresponded to celestial events. When priests chanted of Marduk, fixing the stations of the great gods, astronomers would verify Jupiter's position in Taurus, proving heaven and earth remained synchronized. The epic's 7 tablets mirrored the 7 days of Akitu. Its division of the year into 12 months reflected in the 12 verses describing Marduk's constellation map. Even the acoustics played a role. The temple's barrel-vaulted ceilings amplified certain phonemes, making words like Ker, earth, rumble through the ground like tectonic shifts. Archaeologists have found vocal training manuals among cuneiform tablets, detailing how priests practiced breath control to sustain guttural sounds believed to vibrate at the same frequency as the gods' voices. The Enuma Elish's power lay in its recursive nature, a story about order's triumph that itself maintained order. When priests described Marduk fashioning the world from Tiamat's corpse, they weren't just recounting history, they were reactivating that creative energy. The ritual's climax saw participants splashing water to mimic the primordial seas, then smashing pottery to echo the shattering of chaos, a sensory overload designed to imprint the myth onto muscle memory. Modern scholars note parallels to quantum physics observer effect. By collectively focusing on this narrative, the Babylonians believed they literally upheld reality's framework. This wasn't blind superstition but sophisticated systems thinking. The epic's recitation coincided with the spring equinox, when the Euphrates floodwaters began receding nature's own annual rebirth. By aligning myth with ecology, the ritual became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The story's promise of renewal matched observable reality, reinforcing faith in the cosmic contract. Even conquered nations adopted the practice. When Cyrus the Great took Babylon, he wisely participated in Akitu, grasping that controlling the story meant controlling the kingdom's pulse. Today, we see echoes of this in New Year's countdowns or national anthems before sports events, communal incantations that reinforce identity. But the Enuma Elish challenges us to consider, what stories are we reciting to sustain our world? The Babylonians understood that civilizations aren't held together by laws or walls alone, but by the tales we breathe life into year after year until they become the air we collectively exhale. The drums spoke in a language older than the town itself, deep, staccato rhythms that seemed to shake dust from the rafters as the first masked figure emerged into the sunlight. This was no ordinary dancer, but an egungun, a swirling tower of layered fabrics in riotous colors, each strip representing a soul returned from the ancestral realm. To the Yoruba people of West Africa, these masked apparitions weren't performers playing roles. They were vessels for the dead, their very movements channeling the cadence and gestures of specific ancestors. Imagine the moment when a particular egungun paused before a young man, tilting its carved wooden mask just so, a gesture instantly recognized by the crowd as mimicking the man's late grandfather's habit of cocking his head while giving advice. The collective gasp wasn't fear but recognition. Grandpa had come back to speak. What set the egungun festivals apart was their intricate social architecture. The masks themselves were only part of the mystery. It was the layering of hand-dyed indigo, Kent, and imported silks that created the illusion of a formless, floating entity. Beneath those fabrics, the chosen dancer underwent weeks of spiritual preparation, fasting and chanting to empty himself of ego, becoming a clean slate for the ancestor's personality to overwrite. But here's where the ritual showed its genius. Not all egungun were benevolent. Some, like the fearsome Oyo Empire's Alapansanpa, wore black and crimson robes, their masks featuring twisted expressions. These represented ancestors returning to chastise the living for broken taboos or community strife, their ominous presence a spiritual audit that kept societal tensions from festering. The festivals weren't just about spectacle, they were a living legal system. In pre-colonial Yorubaland, egungun appearances could settle land disputes when human judges failed. A masked figure might reenact the original boundary-marking ceremony from a century prior, settling arguments by embodying the very elder who witnessed it. Women barred from male-dominated courts could seek justice through the egungun, as ancestors were considered beyond gender biases. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery shards depicting these processions in 12th century Ife, proving how deeply the tradition was rooted. The costumes themselves were time capsules, layers of fabric from different eras, with the outermost always reflecting contemporary styles, visually knitting past and present together. Modern iterations reveal the ritual's adaptability. Today's egungun might incorporate cell phone charms into their costumes or reference current events in their cryptic pronouncements. Diaspora communities in Cuba and Brazil have fused the tradition with Catholic saints' days, creating hybrid festivals where Yoruba ancestors speak through Caribbean patois. But the core remains unchanged, a profound belief that the dead aren't gone, just momentarily silent, and that the right rhythms, the right fabrics, the right sacred words can make them audible again. In a world obsessed with moving forward, the Egungun festivals whisper an alternative truth that sometimes progress means knowing how to listen backward. The high priests of Cusco held their breath as the winter solstice sun hovered above the sacred horizon, its weakened rays barely warming the golden disk embedded in the temple wall. This was the moment the Inca had prepared for all year, not just a celestial event, but a high-stakes performance where the fate of the empire hung in the balance. Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, transformed the Andean winter into a theater of cosmic intervention, with the Sapa Inca playing the lead role in a drama that blended sacred astronomy with political genius. As the sun reached its lowest point in the sky, the emperor emerged in resplendent robes woven with sun motifs, his massive gold pectoral reflecting the pale light. With solemn ceremony, he raised a golden tether toward the heavens, miming the act of securing the sun to a stone pillar called the Intihuatana, literally, the hitching post of the sun. The symbolism was visceral. Just as a farmer might tie a reluctant llama to prevent it from wandering, the Inca would symbolically bind the sun to halt its southward retreat. The crowd's collective gasp wasn't mere awe, it was relief. If the ritual succeeded, the days would lengthen again, crops would thrive, and the empire's divine mandate would be confirmed. But Inti Raymi was more than spiritual theater. It was a masterclass in imperial control. The ceremony coincided exactly with the maize planting season, turning astronomical phenomena into agricultural directives. When priests sacrificed flawless llamas whose lungs were inspected for auspicious signs, they weren't just seeking divine favor, they were releasing a carefully timed signal for farmers across Tahuantinsuyo to begin sowing. The festival's location in Cusco's central plaza reinforced the capital's role as the cosmological axis, with the emperor positioned as the literal mediator between the celestial and earthly realms. Archaeologists have discovered Intihuatana stones across the empire, many precisely aligned to cast no shadow at midday during solstices. These weren't primitive sundials but sophisticated instruments of statecraft. By controlling the observation of solar events, the Inca centralized knowledge that had previously belonged to local shamans. The golden tether ritual, though symbolic, carried the weight of scientific authority, convincing subjects from Ecuador to Chile that their rulers commanded the very movements of the heavens. Modern reconstructions of Inti Raymi still draw thousands to Cusco each June, but the original ceremony's true brilliance lay in its psychological alchemy. When subjects saw their emperor stop the sun, they witnessed the ultimate confirmation of the Inca's divine right to rule. The ritual's success wasn't measured in celestial mechanics, but in the relieved faces of farmers who could now plant with confidence, and in the awed whispers of conquered nations who believed their new rulers controlled time itself. What lingers most powerfully is the Incas' understanding that power isn't just taken, it's staged. Their golden tethers and solstice dramas transformed inevitable astronomical events into earned victories, turning the empire's survival into a story where every citizen played a part. The sun would have continued its journey northward without the ceremony, but the people's faith in their rulers that needed to be tied down with something stronger than gold. The table gleams under candlelight, set not for a meal but for time travel. Each item on the Passover Seder plate a portal to an ancient story. A shank bone recalls the lamb's blood marking Hebrew doorways, bitter herbs evoke slavery's sting, and charaset, a paste of apples, nuts, and wine, mimics the mortar of pyramids built under Pharaoh's lash. But the genius of this ritual lies beyond symbolism. The Seder transforms passive listeners into active participants, ensuring history isn't just learned but relived. When a child asks the 4 questions, their curiosity sparks a chain of memory stretching back 35 centuries, proving some stories survive not through scrolls alone, but through the act of handing them down like a treasured recipe. Consider the matzah's paradox. This bread of affliction, baked in haste, becomes the centerpiece of liberation. Its crisp brittleness cracks under fingers like the Red Sea's parting, while its absence of leaven serves as edible theology. Oppression puffs up like yeast, but humility flattens into freedom. Families don't merely describe the Exodus, they embody it, reclining like royalty to celebrate their ancestors' deliverance while leaving Elijah's cup untouched, a space reserved for hope's perpetual arrival. The ritual structure mirrors the Jewish experience itself, cycles of oppression and resilience, tasted in alternating bites of horseradish and sweet wine. Archaeologists have found traces of seders in the unlikeliest places, clandestine Haggadahs scribbled on concentration camp scraps, makeshift seder plates fashioned from Red Cross rations in POW camps. These adaptations reveal the ritual's radical adaptability. Where the 4 traditional cups of wine couldn't be found, water became a 5th cup honoring survival. Modern seders might include oranges on the plate to symbolize inclusion, or a roasted beet substituting the shank bone for vegetarians, proof that tradition thrives not by rigidity, but by making room at the table for new voices. The seder's enduring power comes from its interactive alchemy. Spilling wine for each plague reminds participants that liberation demands sacrifice, while hiding the afikoman matzah turns children into detectives of their own heritage. Unlike rituals locked in temples, this one unfolds in homes, kitchens doubling as classrooms, grandparents becoming griots. When participants declare, "Next year in Jerusalem," they're not just referencing a place, but a promise that the work of freedom is never finished, and that the tastiest stories are the ones we keep seasoning with every generation's tears and laughter. The first drops of rain had barely kissed the dry Cambodian soil when the king stepped onto the freshly prepared field, his silk robes hitched up to reveal bare feet caked with sacred earth. This was no ordinary ploughing. It was the royal ploughing ceremony, a ritual so precise in its movements that the angle of the oxen's turn or the depth of the furrow could foretell the fate of an entire harvest. Picture the scene: gilded ploughs cutting through the damp soil, Brahmins chanting verses older than Angkor Wat itself, and thousands of farmers leaning forward as the royal oxen were presented with 7 silver trays, each holding symbols of abundance or scarcity. Would the beasts choose rice grains or cotton, water or wine? Their selections weren't mere spectacle. They were the kingdom's agricultural forecast, interpreted with the gravity of a modern economic report. What made this ritual extraordinary wasn't just its predictive theater, but how it physically entwined monarchy with mud. The king's brief stint as a plowman wasn't symbolic, it was contractual. A reminder that his divine right to rule hinged on delivering literal fruitfulness to his people. The ceremony's origins stretch back to the Khmer Empire's zenith, when rulers like Jayavarman Roman VII didn't just build temples, but vast irrigation systems that turned monsoon floods into liquid abundance. By personally opening the planting season, kings transformed agricultural labor into sacred theater, their sweat-stained brows proving they bore the same burdens as the lowest rice farmer. The genius lay in the ritual's multivocal symbolism. The 2 oxen represented the sun and moon, their plow tracing the path of the heavens across the field. The 7 trays mirrored the 7 stages of rice cultivation, from seedling to harvest. Even the fabrics used to wipe the king's brow held meaning. Certain colors attracted benevolent spirits believed to hover over fertile fields. Modern agronomists might scoff at the superstition, but the ceremony's timing aligned with uncanny accuracy to optimal planting conditions. its rhythms honed over centuries of observing soil moisture and celestial patterns. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence linking the ritual to pre-Angkorian fertility cults, where bronze plowshares were buried as votive offerings. Today, as Cambodia's farmers face climate change's erratic rains, the ceremony has adapted without losing its core. Drones now monitor fields, but the king still grips that ancient plow. His furrow, once believed to channel the serpentine power of the Mekong itself, now serves a deeper purpose, a living bridge between earth and authority, where sovereignty is still measured not in gold but in grain. The ground shakes before you even see them, a chorus of thunderous stomps, eyes bulging with primal intensity, voices erupting in a harmony of rage and reverence. The Maori Haka isn't merely performed, it detonates into existence, a living bridge between the present and 1,000 years of ancestral memory. Originally born on New Zealand's battlefields, this ritual was far more than intimidation, it was spiritual alchemy. Warriors painted with ochre and cloaked in flax invoked deified ancestors like Tumatoinga, god of war, through perfectly synchronized movements. Each slap to the thighs mimicked the sound of bones breaking. Every thrusting tongue symbolized defiance against death itself. But here's what outsiders often miss. The Haka's power came from its precision. A single misstep or mistimed shout wasn't just error. It risked severing the sacred connection to those watching from the spirit world. What's fascinating is how the Haka escaped the confines of warfare without losing its soul. When Maori battalions performed it during World War I in the trenches of Gallipoli, the ritual became a lifeline, a way to carry home into hell. Today, its iterations span the emotional spectrum. The spine-tingling Ka-mate celebrates life's triumph over adversity, while the Kapa o Pango, adopted by New Zealand's All Blacks rugby team, modernizes the tradition with a throat-slitting gesture that's less violence than visceral metaphor, offering one's very breath to the collective struggle. Schools now teach Hakas to honor graduations, weddings, even funerals, proving rituals can evolve without erasing their origins. The Haka's global resonance reveals something universal about human expression. When NFL teams or university groups attempt their versions, it's not appropriation but recognition, a raw, bodily understanding that some emotions are too vast for words alone. The ritual's genius lies in its duality. The same movements that once prepared warriors to take lives now unite strangers at sports stadiums, political rallies, and film premieres. Archaeologists have found petroglyphs depicting Haka-like postures in pre-colonial meeting houses, suggesting its roots stretch deeper than oral history records. Perhaps the Haka's greatest lesson is about cultural elasticity. Unlike static museum pieces, living traditions breathe, adapting to new contexts while retaining ancestral DNA. When a toddler in Auckland learns to widen their eyes and slap their knees, they're not just mimicking elders, they're plugging into an unbroken current of identity. The Haka reminds us that the most powerful rituals aren't frozen in time. They're languages, constantly translating the old world for the new, ensuring the past never becomes a foreign country. High on the Bandiagara escarpment, where Mali's red cliffs meet the endless stretch of the Sahel, time doesn't flow, it spirals. Every 60 years, when the star Sirius aligns with a precise point on the horizon, the Dogon people awaken their most sacred rite, the Sigwi festival. This isn't just a celebration. It's a living library where every swaying step of masked dancers and every carved groove on towering costumes preserves knowledge so ancient it predates telescopes. Picture the scene, elders in indigo robes guiding the creation of the Kanaga mask, its double-barred cross symbolizing both the shape of the universe and the delicate balance between earth and sky. As the drums begin, dancers become celestial bodies in motion, their undulating movements tracing the elliptical orbit of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, yet described in Dogon oral tradition centuries before Western science confirmed its existence. What makes Sigwi extraordinary isn't just its astronomical precision, but how it transforms cosmology into community. The festival unfolds over 7 years, a single cycle mirroring the lifespan of the mythical first ancestor. Each village takes turns hosting ceremonies, passing along a sacred serpent-shaped staff called the Yapunu, like a baton in a cosmic relay. The masks themselves are more than art, they're mnemonic devices. The Siraj, a towering multi-tiered mask stretching over 15 feet high, encodes the Dogon creation myth in its layered carvings, each level representing a stage of universal emergence, from the primordial egg to the branching of human lineages. When worn by initiates, its swaying motion mimics the serpent Namo's descent from the stars, a performance so exact that anthropologists have noted its parallels to modern wave-particle duality theories. The ritual's endurance defies logic. Without written records, the Dogon have preserved this intricate calendar through oral repetition and tactile memory. Young boys learn to carve replicas of the 80 distinct mask types before touching tools, tracing the patterns in sand until their hands move with ancestral muscle memory. The dances, practiced only during Sigwi years, are taught through a unique body grammar, elders adjusting a dancer's elbow by fractions of an inch to align with celestial angles. Modern astrophysicists still puzzle over how this knowledge survived. Did the Dogon inherit it from an unknown advanced civilization, as some suggest? Or is Sigwi proof that human observation, honed over millennia, can decode the cosmos without lenses or equations? Sigwi's final act reveals its deepest wisdom. As the new cycle begins, villagers burn the old masks in a purifying fire, not as destruction but as release. The ashes are scattered over fields, merging celestial knowledge with the soil that sustains them. In a world obsessed with preservation, the Dogon embrace impermanence, trusting that what matters will be remembered, not in wood or pigment, but in the collective pulse of a people who still dance with the stars. The air hums with the haunting cry of the ney flute as the dervishes' white robes flare outward like a galaxy spinning into being. Sufi whirling isn't dance in the ordinary sense, it's celestial mechanics made flesh. A ritual where the human body becomes a living metaphor for the cosmos itself. Each rotation begins with arms crossed over the chest, the dancer's posture echoing the Arabic numeral for 1, a physical declaration of divine unity. As the music swells, the right palm turns upward to receive grace from heaven, the left downward to channel it to earth, the body transforming into a conduit between realms. The skirts aren't mere costume. Their weighted hems create centrifugal force, allowing the dervish to spin for hours without dizziness, a feat of sacred physics perfected over 8 centuries. What sets this ritual apart is its scientific precision hiding in plain sight. The dervish's pivot foot remains rooted to a single point, just as planets orbit fixed axes, while the free foot propels the turn in perfect counterbalance. The head tilts at a precise 25-degree angle, minimizing vestibular disruption, an anatomical hack that lets consciousness dissolve while the body moves with machine-like endurance. The ritual's founder, Rumi, described it as dying before you die, but modern neurologists recognize it as a gateway to altered states. Brain scans of whirling dervishes show theta wave activity similar to deep meditation, proving the spin isn't just symbolic, it's a biochemical key to transcendence. The ceremony's structure mirrors Sufi cosmology in exquisite detail. The 4-part selam salutation represents the journey from material existence to divine union. The first rotation acknowledges human law, the second divine love, the third surrender, and the fourth the soul's return as a guide for others. When the dervish sheds their black cloak mid-ceremony, revealing white robes beneath, it's more than theater, it's a reenactment of the soul's liberation from the body's prison. Even the rotation direction holds meaning. Counterclockwise whirls trace the Earth's actual rotation, grounding the ritual in planetary truth rather than arbitrary tradition. Contemporary observers often mistake the whirling for spectacle, but its true power lies in radical egalitarianism. Unlike rituals requiring special vestments or temple access, this one demands only a body willing to turn toward truth. Modern practitioners range from Turkish bankers to Californian surfers, united by the ritual's visceral democracy. Anyone can spin, but mastery requires surrendering the ego's gravity. In a world obsessed with linear progress, the dervishes offer a radical alternative. That enlightenment might not be a straight path, but an endless, glorious orbit around the heart's hidden sun. The palm nuts clatter onto the wooden divination tray like a sudden downpour of wisdom, 16 crescent-shaped seeds that hold the answers to everything from a farmer's ruined crops to a king's looming war. In the hands of a babalawo, a priest of the Ifa tradition, these aren't random throws but a sacred dialogue with Orunmila, the Yoruba deity of wisdom who witnessed the birth of creation itself. What outsiders might dismiss as chants becomes, in this ritual, a meticulously coded language. Each configuration of nuts corresponds to one of 256 Odu, the foundational chapters of Ifa's oral encyclopedia, containing thousands of verses passed down through generations. Imagine the scene, a client's anxious breath mingling with the scent of kola nuts as the priest chants the Odu's poetry, his voice weaving ancestral proverbs with precise advice about which market day to avoid or which herb will cure a child's fever. The genius of Ifa lies in its refusal to separate the spiritual from the practical. When the nuts land in the pattern called Og Meiji, 8 marks on the right, 8 on the left, it invokes a story about the tortoise who outwitted hunger by sharing his meager meal, teaching that generosity in scarcity brings abundance. But this isn't just folklore, it's applied philosophy. A trader receiving this sign might be advised to extend credit to a struggling neighbor, not as charity but as strategic community building. Archaeologists have found divination trays in 12th century Ife, adorned with carvings of eyes and ears, reminders that true divination requires both keen observation and deep listening. The trays themselves are cosmological maps. Their circular form represents the cyclical nature of time, while the central line mirrors the boundary between the visible and invisible worlds. What's often misunderstood is Ifa's mathematical sophistication. The 256 Odu aren't arbitrary. They form a binary system predating Leibniz's calculus by centuries. Each toss of the nuts creates a sequence akin to computer code, with the 16 possible positions corresponding to the 16 major orishas. Modern computer scientists have noted parallels between Ifa's recursive verse structures and algorithmic decision trees, where each answer branches into new questions. The ritual's precision is such that seasoned babalawos can spend decades memorizing over 4,000 verses per Odu, their brains becoming living libraries of ecological knowledge, conflict resolution strategies, and even weather patterns. But Ifa's true power is its democratization of uncertainty. Unlike oracles who speak in riddles, the Babalawo translates divine messages into actionable steps. Plant yams after the 3rd rainfall. Reconcile with your brother before the moon wanes. In a world increasingly obsessed with control, this ritual reframes the unknown not as something to fear, but as a collaborator. When those palm nuts scatter across the tray, they don't predict the future. They map the hidden contours of the present, revealing paths already woven into the fabric of existence but waiting to be seen by eyes humble enough to ask. Long before science could explain the movement of stars or the patterns of harvests, rituals became humanity's first textbooks, written not in ink, but in firelight, song, and the shared rhythm of bodies moving in unison. These ceremonies didn't spring from whimsy. They were survival strategies forged in the crucible of uncertainty. When drought-withered crops or storms swallowed fishing boats, rituals offered a semblance of control, not over nature itself, but over the terror of chaos. The Aztec New Fire Ceremony, for instance, didn't just mark time. It staved off existential dread, convincing an entire civilization that collective action could keep the universe from collapsing into darkness. But these practices did more than soothe anxieties. They built the scaffolding of early societies. Take the Babylonian Akitu festival. By humiliating their king annually, they transformed raw political power into something accountable, something bound by cosmic rules. The ritual didn't just entertain. It prevented tyranny by making authority temporary, renewable, and subject to divine judgment. Similarly, the Maori Haka's synchronized fury wasn't just battlefield theater. It welded warriors into a single organism, their shared breath and pounding feet erasing individual fear. Rituals turned me into we, whether through the sweat of a communal dance or the shared silence of a Passover Seder's most solemn moment. What's often overlooked is how these traditions encoded practical wisdom in sacred form. The Dogon's Sigwi festival, with its precise astronomical alignments, wasn't just worship. It was a living almanac, preserving celestial knowledge across generations without a single written word. The Ifa divination system, with its binary configurations of palm nuts, embedded ecological knowledge and conflict resolution strategies into what outsiders might dismiss as superstition. These weren't just stories, they were the cloud storage of antiquity, safeguarding survival tactics in rituals that could outlast empires. Yet the deepest magic of these rituals lay in their ability to make the abstract viscerally real. The Egyptian weighing of the heart ceremony didn't just teach morality, it made ethics tangible, transforming right and wrong into physical weight on a golden scale. The Sufi dervishes' world didn't just symbolize cosmic orbits, it let dancers feel, in their spinning bones, the universe's endless turning. By embodying ideas, justice as balance, time as a circle, death as transformation, rituals made the invisible unforgettable. Today, we may no longer fear that the sun won't rise without a sacrifice, but we still crave rituals that anchor us, whether it's the quiet hum of a morning coffee routine or the collective roar of a stadium wave. The mediums change, but the hunger remains, to touch the numinous, to belong to a story bigger than ourselves, to find order in the chaos. These ancient ceremonies whisper a truth we're still learning. Civilization isn't built on laws or tools alone, but on the shared moments that tell us who we are and why we matter. Modern echoes of these ancient rituals surround us not as museum relics, but as living traditions we've reshaped for contemporary life. Consider the Olympic torch relay, where runners carry fire across continents, in a direct descendant of Greek rituals honoring Prometheus, the god who gifted humanity flame. That sacred fire isn't just ceremonial. It's a thread connecting today's athletes to competitors who raced in Delphi's stadium 2,500 years ago, their victories dedicated to Apollo. Even the medals handed out mirror ancient laurel wreaths, transforming olive branches into gold and silver while preserving the same symbolic weight. Courtrooms offer another striking example. When judges don black robes or witnesses swear oaths on holy books, they're unknowingly reenacting Babylonian legal rites where verdicts were delivered in temple courtyards under the gaze of Shamash, the sun god of justice. The raised bench where modern magistrates sit, a direct evolution from the elevated platforms of Mesopotamian ziggurats designed to place adjudicators closer to divine wisdom. Even the concept of swearing in witnesses traces back to Viking Age oaths sworn on rings dipped in sacrificial blood, a practice so binding that breaking one meant exile or death. Sports traditions brim with these hidden continuities. Football fans singing team anthems channel the same collective energy as Celtic warriors chanting before battle, their voices uniting strangers into a tribe. The Haka performed by New Zealand's All Blacks isn't just pre-game theatrics. It's a contemporary iteration of Maori warrior rituals, where synchronized movements and guttural cries were believed to summon ancestral strength. Baseball's seventh inning stretch, a secularized version of medieval European churching breaks, where congregations stood to relieve stiffness during lengthy religious services. Seasonal celebrations weave these threads even tighter. Halloween's jack-o'-lanterns preserve the spirit of Samhain's turnip lanterns, once carved to ward off wandering souls. Christmas trees echo Norse Yule traditions, where evergreens symbolized life's persistence through winter's darkness. Even New Year's countdowns inherit the Babylonian obsession with calendrical renewal, except now we watch the ball drop in Times Square instead of humbling our kings. The true magic lies in how these rituals adapt without losing their essence. Japanese shrine visits at New Year's retain the solemnity of ancient Shinto purification rites, even as visitors snap selfies with sacred Ema plaques. Thanksgiving meals preserve the harvest festival's communal gratitude, though the menu has shifted from venison to turkey. What began as survival strategies appeasing gods for good crops or victory in battle have softened into cultural touchstones, yet they still serve their original purpose, binding us together through shared symbolism. Recognizing these connections does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It reveals the sacred hiding in plain sight, that rush you feel when your national anthem plays. The same collective effervescence that stirred hearts at Eleusinian Mysteries, the quiet focus of a yoga class, a distant cousin to the dervish's whirl. These rituals endure because they answer something timeless in us, the need to mark moments, to belong, to touch something larger than ourselves. When we light birthday candles or toast at weddings, we're not just following customs, we're adding our voices to a chorus that began when the first humans gathered around fire, trying to make sense of the stars. From the pyramids to the pagodas, rituals have been the silent architects of civilization, shaping laws, morals, and identities. They're more than just traditions. They're the operating systems of ancient societies, coded with the wisdom of how to live, how to govern, and how to make meaning from chaos. Think about it. The Aztec New Fire Ceremony wasn't just a way to mark time. It was a cosmic contract, a way to convince an entire civilization that their actions could keep the universe from collapsing. The Egyptian weighing of the heart, a moral compass carved in gold, teaching that justice isn't abstract, but something you could literally feel in your chest. These rituals weren't performances, they were blueprints for survival. But here's what's truly fascinating: these ancient practices aren't locked in the past. They hum beneath the surface of our modern lives, often in ways we don't even recognize. That cup of coffee you drink every morning at the same time. It's a personal ritual, a tiny anchor of predictability in an unpredictable world. The way we gather for birthdays, anniversaries, or even the Super Bowl, these are our versions of communal rites, moments where we step out of ordinary time and into something sacred, even if we don't call it that. The Maori Haka, once a battlefield invocation, now rallies rugby teams and wedding guests alike, proving that rituals don't fade, they evolve. What ties all these practices together, from the grandest ceremonies to the quietest daily habits, is their power to transform the abstract into the tangible. The Sufi dervish's whirl makes the cosmos feel alive in the body. The Japanese tea ceremony turns mindfulness into movement. Even something as simple as blowing out birthday candles carries the echo of ancient fire rituals where flames carried wishes to the divine. These aren't just things people did, they're things people needed to do, because rituals are how we stitch meaning into the fabric of existence. As we close this journey through 38 of history's most remarkable rituals, here's the invitation: look for the echoes around you. Maybe it's in the way your family marks holidays, or the unspoken rules of your workplace, or even the quiet habits that ground you. Because the past isn't dead, it's hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to recognize it. Which of these rituals spoke to you? Was it the Viking Blot's raw honesty, the Dogon's celestial precision, or the quiet courage of the Tibetan sky burial? Drop your thoughts below. We're all part of this conversation, just as every generation adds its own layer to the rituals that shape us. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden corners. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, civilization isn't built on stone or steel, but on the stories we've agreed to believe and the rituals that keep those stories